Hello everyone, welcome to the How to Write a High Probability Federal Resume course so you can increase your chances of getting a federal job. I am once again Ken Elsoff, former GS-12 HR specialist. So we're going to jump right into the discussion on how to write a federal resume. Federal resumes are probably the area where I received the highest number of questions from federal job applicants. A lot of people don't know what a federal resume looks like or how to write one and how to increase their chances of getting a federal job. I dealt with hundreds and hundreds of applicants who were trying to get federal jobs, and this clearly was their number one most common concern. Some of the common questions that I received were, what does a federal resume look like? How long is a federal resume supposed to be? Do I have to customize my resume for every job I apply for? Can I create one base resume and use that one single resume to apply to all the jobs I'm interested in? Should my resume be more specific or general? These are very, very common questions. We receive them all the time. So let's explore a little bit about the outline of this course and what we're going to cover. Firstly, we're going to cover some rumors, some of the most common rumors that there are floating around about federal resumes, and we're going to knock those out immediately. Then I'm going to jump into some frequently asked questions that commonly come in. I've already covered a few of those just on that last slide, but we're going to dive in a little bit deeper on some more of the questions that we received with regard to federal resume writing. We're going to talk about how to increase your chances of getting an interview as a result of some of the techniques and tactics involving your resume. I'm going to describe the differences between a federal resume and a private sector resume. We're going to have you get started on your own resume. I'm going to discuss a little bit about the work experience section on your resume or inside the usajobs resume builder. I'm going to highlight some of the common resume styles and which one is preferred and why. I'm going to give you a lot of reasons on why that's preferred. Where exactly to find the keywords that you will be that you need to harvest from the announcement in order to place in your resume. And I'll give you some last-minute tips based on some of the experiences that I had as a federal HR specialist. And then I'm going to show you what I call the high probability federal resume. That's one that really addresses a lot of the things that federal HR specialists are looking for when they're examining resumes. And I'll make that, I'll go a little bit more in depth on the definition of high probability once we get to that point. Before we move on, however, I do want to tell you a little bit about what I cannot do. And the disclaimer here highlights that no resume instructor or coach can guarantee that you will get a federal job or even an interview. You can have the greatest resume in the world and still not get an interview, and there are several reasons for that, and we're going to cover those. But the point is, I cannot make a guarantee that once you've completed this course, that even if you apply all of the lessons and techniques that I described for you, there are still possibilities that you can't get it, or that you won't get an interview. But I need to make it clear that I cannot guarantee you will get an interview or a job. That's not the purpose of this training. There are a lot of companies out there that will, in my opinion, fraudulently guarantee that they can get you a federal job. I don't agree with those. I think they're fake, they're phony, and so I wanted to highlight right up front that I can't promise you. The best you can do is learn some tips to help increase your chances. And that's what I'm delivering to you through this course right now. But the only thing I can guarantee you is that you will not get 100% of the jobs you never apply for. I know there's a double negative in that sentence, but I wrote that specifically because you need to apply. You need to apply to jobs in order to get interviews, and that's the only thing I can guarantee you. So let's dive in to the first section and cover some of the basic rumors that are floating around about federal resumes. Hello and welcome back. We're now going to discuss some of the major rumors that are floating around regarding federal resumes. So let's dive right in. I first want to discuss the elephant in the room and address a major rumor. This is probably the biggest rumor that you will ever come across with regard to federal resumes. And that is, there is no such thing as the federal resume. It does not exist. It's fake, it's phony, it's a lie. Simply put, there is no government-wide, government-mandated, government-copyrighted federal resume format. Some agencies have their own format that they require, and that would be stated in the announcement. But as far as government-wide, there is no such thing as the federal resume. I promise. Thousands and thousands of resumes have crossed my desk, and they came in all formats and in all colors. I qualified many of them, most of them, and guess what? That was just fine. The formats were just fine. The format is not as important as the content that is inside the resume. However, there is out there at least one company that teaches how to write the federal resume. I disagree with this. I understand that that's their marketing strategy, but be advised, this was their own invention, and it is not mandated across the federal government. There is no such thing as a federal resume. You can search for the federal resume in search engines like Google, and a number of sites will come up, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are the federal resume, despite calling themselves that, or despite those companies calling them these resumes the federal resume. However, here's the good news. I can teach you a way that will increase your chances of getting qualified and getting an interview. So let's explore some more of the common myths about federal resumes. The purpose of a resume is to get a job. That's false. The purpose of a resume is to get you an interview. The purpose of a resume in the private sector is to get an interview and is more general in nature. In the federal government, the purpose is to show your qualifications so that you can be referred by the Human Resources Office. Referred meaning that your resume has been screened for qualifications and eligibility, and your resume has been forwarded to the hiring manager or selecting official. Referred meaning that your resume was sent forward, although still not a guarantee that you'll get an interview. But your resume needs to include more specifics and similar language as the vacancy announcement, because the HR specialist is looking to see if you have the specialized experience or directly related experience requirements of the position for which you are applying. So what that's saying is these federal job announcements on USA Jobs have so many keywords in them and describe the duties often so well that you need to ensure that your resume is really going to address the points that are in that announcement. For you to submit a resume or to draft a resume that hasn't been customized to any specific announcement and submit it, it's a mistake, because the HR specialist is going to be looking at your resume and comparing it to the details that were in the job announcement, in addition to some others, to find out if you are qualified. But the purpose is to get you an interview, but you first have to demonstrate that you're qualified for the job. A computer scans your resume for keywords. That's false. Not in USA Jobs Application Manager. USA Jobs does not have keyword scanning capabilities from the resume side. However, some agencies have their own application websites, and some of them do have keyword scanners. I believe the Central Intelligence Agency and possibly the FBI do have keyword scanners. I think the Department of the Army used to, but no longer do. I'm not entirely sure on that. But the point is, if you're applying for a job through USA Jobs Application Manager, it does not have keyword scanners. The focus of this training, however, is going to be on USA Jobs specifically and not all those other agencies' applications websites. So you just have to read the instructions for each job you're applying for. If you leave USA Jobs to apply for a job on one of those agency websites, low-level GS4 clerks screen your resume before it gets sent to the supervisor. That's false. Resumes are typically screened by well-trained HR specialists who know how to make complex eligibility determinations as well as making qualification determinations. Most of the time, the person who's reviewing your resume is under the tutelage of a seasoned HR specialist or their supervisor, and a lot of training is provided to federal HR specialists who are reviewing these resumes. So it's not a low-level clerk who is reviewing your resume. Your resume should only be 1 page in length. That's false. This is another rumor, in fact. I want to clarify. There is no official resume length requirement for the federal government. Some agencies might have their own prescribed formats and their own resume length requirements. However, there is no official length. I have seen 20-page resumes and I've seen 1-page resumes inside the federal government. They're all fine as long as they address the specific specialized experience requirements that federal HR specialists are looking for. However, the average length of a federal resume is 3 to 5 pages. And that's what's recommended often, although not mandatory. It is recommended. That way you ensure that you have enough detail in your resume to give the HR specialist a good feel for whether or not you meet the requirements of the job and you have the background that they're seeking. So 3 to 5 pages is a good rule of thumb. If you need more, use more. If you need less, use less. But make sure you have the keywords in there and you're addressing what the announcement is asking for. However, please don't focus on the length of your resume. Again, I've seen 20-page resumes. That's fine as long as you focus on the content of the resume. You want to pull it from the announcement, and you want to make sure that it really is specifically written for the job that you're applying for. It has to be applicable to the job you're applying for. If I got fired from a job, I should keep it off my resume. That's false. That's false. You want to always disclose anytime you were fired or resigned before getting fired from a job within the last 7 years. If you're selected for a job and a background check determines that you were previously fired from a job, but you didn't disclose it to the government when you applied, you can be let go. You can be removed and lose your job. Or if it's during the offer period, the offer can be withdrawn. So do not lie and do not keep firings off of your resume. Just because you've been fired from a previous job doesn't mean you're not going to get hired. It's just a question we need to have answered up front, so don't try to hide it. And that concludes the majority of the rumors the common rumors that are floating around about resumes. In the next section, we're going to discuss some of the most frequently asked questions about federal resumes. Now we're going to move on to some frequently asked questions. I'm only going to cover about 5 of them. There are many, many questions that people have about resumes, but I'm going to cover the 5 most common ones that I encountered when I was a federal recruiter. The first is, when listing my previous employment on my resume, how far back in time should I go? And there's really no hard and fast rule about that. My personal advice to you is to go back about 10 years. Sometimes when people have a very diverse career background and they've got 30 years of experience hopping from job to job, there's really no reason to submit a long resume that covers 30-year span, only because it seems that when people do that, they include a lot of details about jobs that have nothing to do with the job that they're applying for. So my answer is go back about 10 years, but if you have experience prior to that 10-year mark that's relevant to the job you're applying for, then include that one as well. But for the most part, 10 years is a good rule of thumb. Make sure that when you are going back to all of those occupations or jobs you've held over the past 10 years, that you're able to include a lot of stories about what you did and how well you did them. If you can't recall any specific activities that you did in that job that relate to what the position you're applying for, then either consider not going back that far or diving a little bit deeper into the knowledge, skills, and abilities of the job you're applying for, and see if then you can extract those out of a position that you previously held. Focus on the position you're applying for. That's the key. That's the whole premise of this course, is read the job announcement, focus on it, make sure your resume is addressing it specifically. Now, when you're writing your resume and you're discussing your previous employment, it's got to be written in such a way that it's speaking towards the job you're applying for. So you want to write it in a way that best reflects your competencies for the position. Is it better to submit my own resume or a USA Jobs resume from Resume Builder? USA Jobs does have a Resume Builder feature inside of it, but essentially you do have three choices. When you're applying for a job, you can submit a USA Jobs resume. You can submit your own personal resume, which typically is in Word format. Or you can do both. You can actually apply to a job with your USA Jobs resume and upload your personal Word resume as a supplemental document. There's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, a lot of people did that. A lot of veterans did that. And in some cases, it helped them get qualified for a job because they wrote their USA Jobs resume at a different time than they wrote their personal Microsoft Word resume. And they kept one of them more up to date than the other most often. But when we as the HR office had received 2 copies of their resumes, we would go through both the USA Jobs resume and their personal resume, Microsoft Word resume, and often make a determination that they were qualified for the job. Whether it was from one or the other, the point is that there's nothing wrong with submitting both, and you can do that. If in the event that they both say the same things and you simply copied and pasted from one to the other and they're absolutely identical, then there really is no reason to submit both. But for some reason, people keep their Word document, personal resumes in a different format and often with different content than what the USA Jobs resume has in it, and that's fine. Then in that case, go ahead and submit both of them. How long should my resume be? I covered that a little bit ago, but that is often a question. So you really shouldn't be much more than 3 to 5 pages. Much more than that, often the details can get lost or hidden inside the resume. And you don't want to bore the specialist who's going to be reviewing your resume by throwing your 20-year biography at them. You only want to give them the details that apply to the job, that are relevant to the job you're applying for. And that's how you hold their attention, and that's how they deem you as qualified or not. So 3 to 5 pages is really a good rule of thumb. Make sure that in addition to that, you can also add pages that describe your knowledge, skills, and abilities statements, the KSAs, which we're going to address a little bit separately in a different portion of this training. But you can submit those separately as well, and they allow you the opportunity to give a little bit more detail, go a little bit further in depth than what your resume has. As I said before, there are exceptions to the 3 to 5 pages that I'm recommending. Sometimes longer is better, sometimes shorter is better. It really is up to you, and it depends on how much content you have that's relevant to the job you're applying for. Do I have to customize my resume for every job I apply for? Yes, you absolutely do. That is the heart and the point of this training. You have to customize your resume for every job you apply for. And when I say customize, I personally advise people to write from scratch their entire resume every time they apply to a new job. And the reason is because you need to first go to the job you want to apply to, pull out and extract all of the relevant keywords that are in that announcement, and then put them inside your resume. If you have only one resume and and you're applying to multiple positions and you're not customizing it, chances are you're going to continue to be rejected. So yes, you need to customize your resume every time and update it with the relevant keywords from the job announcement you're applying to. This is what I was hinting at just a second ago. Can I create a base resume and use that one single resume to apply to all the jobs I'm interested in? Well, you can, but my advice is don't. Using a generic resume, as I referenced before a couple slides back, if you write a 20-page biography resume that goes back 30 years, chances are you wrote that as a generic resume, one resume that you can use to apply for all jobs, and that's a mistake. That's a major mistake in the federal government. You don't want to do that. It's a bad idea. If you're doing that, you're not able to capture all those relevant keywords that you should be extracting from each announcement. And I've hit on that multiple times, and I sound like a broken record, I know this, but it's extremely important. If you want an interview, you have to customize your resume and do not use a standard base resume to apply for all the jobs you're interested in. The exception to that is if you're continuously applying to jobs that are in the same career field. So for example, if you have one strong base resume to describe all of your experience as a plumber and you're only applying to plumber positions, well, then you may not need to tweak it each time you apply because you're essentially applying to the same job. Although some of the requirements may be a little bit different from announcement to announcement, it's still just a relevant base resume that's specialized in plumbing that is for plumbing positions. In that case, yeah, it's okay to use a base resume. But if you're applying to a bunch of different jobs and a bunch of different series and specialties, then you definitely do not want to have a base resume for that purpose. What does a federal resume look like? The truth is, as I stated before, any resume can work as long as you include the right keywords and have the right experience detailed. Don't focus on the format, focus on the content. Should my resume be more specific or general? It should be very, very specific to the job you are applying for. You do not want a general base resume. You want it to be specific to the job you're applying for, and the way to make that happen is to extract the keywords from the announcement and put them in your resume. Build your resume around those keywords. Now we're going to explore how you can increase your chances of getting an interview through some resume tips and tricks and strategies. Now I'm going to discuss how you can increase your chances of getting an interview. This is one of the unique strategies that not many people teach in the transition assistance classes, the TAP classes, or in any of these federal jobs coaching programs that seminars that are put on across the country. For some reason, this just isn't covered, and I think that maybe it's because many of the teachers of these seminars were never actually federal HR specialists and don't really have a working understanding of how this works on the inside. So one of the things you need to realize is when you're applying for a federal job, all of the applicants who submit resumes are put into different piles based on their eligibility to apply for the job. That's often laid out under the Who May Apply section in the announcement. But because there are so many different piles, it really impacts your chances of getting an interview, because in some cases supervisors can pick and choose which piles that they interview from arbitrarily. In other cases, they're restricted on the order in which they need to interview and go through these piles. And sometimes that's laid out in a union contract, for example, meaning, for example, first area of consideration must be internal employees who already work at that facility. If a union contract says that, then the supervisor is restricted in picking only that pile of resumes that they have to consider first before they can move on to any of the other resumes. Because the supervisor can pick and choose these piles, and sometimes it's at random, you may or may not get an interview at random. Because if they pick a pile and they conduct interviews of the resumes within that pile, and they pick a person from that pile, they're not even going to look at the resumes in all of the other piles. They don't need to. They've already made their selection. So wow, this is one of the reasons why you can have the best resume in the world and your chances are still slim in getting a job because the supervisor didn't choose your pile to interview from. Now let's dive in a little bit deeper and see what these piles are. Promotion eligibles, for example. These are government employees who are applying for a job, but they're currently at a lower grade, meaning if a GS-11 job opens up, all of the people who are at a lower grade than that GS-11 can apply for it. As a GS-9, for example, you can apply for the GS-11 job and get a promotion, get promoted up into that GS-11 job. So the promotion eligibles are people who, if selected, would get a promotion. That's one pile of resumes. Change to lower grades. This is the pile of resumes of people who are at a higher grade and they're applying for a job at a lower grade, meaning somebody is a GS-12, but they apply to a job that's open and currently announced at the GS-11 level. If somebody is selected from this pile of resumes, the change to lower grade resumes, they would take a demotion. They would move down in grade level if selected. And you may be wondering why, and the answer, why would somebody do that, take a demotion on purpose? And sometimes it's to move to another facility or to change agencies because the GS-11 job is located closer to family members or in a different geographical area that the person's been trying to get to. Better work location, different agency preferences, trying to change career fields. There are a whole bunch of reasons why people would take demotions to get into jobs, but just recognize that this is one additional pile of resumes that your resume is going to be competing against. Reassignments, those are people who already work in the government who are already at that grade level, and they're just asking or applying to the job to basically get a lateral transfer. That would be the same thing as a GS-7 applying for another job that's at the GS-7 level. It's a lateral move. Their pay won't change if they stay in the same geographic area under the same pay chart. Their pay won't change. Their grade won't change. They'll stay the same step. They'll just take on a new job title or be in a new department or even in a new agency. But again, the reasons are the same why people would do that. So this is another pile of resumes that your resume may be up against. External agency employees. Those are employees who work in the same agency as the vacant position is located in, but they're in a different geographic location. An example of that might be a VA employee who works at a VA hospital in Florida, and they're applying for a VA job at a VA hospital in Minnesota. That is a separate pile of resumes based on them being an external agency employee. Sometimes they're referred to as internals as well because they're in the same agency, but sometimes not. Regardless, they are a different category of people. All permanent federal employees, that's a pile of resumes that have come in from anyone who's applying as a transfer and trying to come into the federal agency where the job opening is. So you're competing against federal employees from other agencies as well. Former permanent federal employees, those are former government employees who left for whatever reason. They are reinstatement eligibles and they're applying to try to come back into the government. That's also a whole separate pile of resumes that you may be competing against. There are retirees. Sometimes retirees leave the government and then after a few years they get bored or they need additional income, so they come back into the government even though they've retired. They're coming back as a reemployed annuitant and they're trying to get back in as a retiree. The VEOA applicants, those are veterans who are eligible under VEOA laws. I'm going to cover that law in a separate presentation as part of this training. But if you're eligible for VEOA and you're applying for a job, you can be put in the pile, your resume can be put in the pile of VEOA applicants. Same thing with VRA. If you're VRA eligible, you can be put in, your resume can be put into the VRA pile. That would be in the same pile as all the other VRA eligibles who applied to the job. 30% or more disabled veterans, those are veterans who are eligible due to a service-connected disability rating of 30% or more. They can go in their own pile of resumes as well. Individuals with disabilities who are eligible under Schedule A can also go in their own pile. And then the last pile, and often the biggest pile of resumes, are those resumes that came in from people who applied to the announcements that are open to the public, where all U.S. citizens may apply. That's a whole separate pile in and of itself, different from the rest of these piles. So what does all this mean? Now that you know all the different piles and categories of people who can be applying for these federal jobs, so what? What does that mean to you? Well, the solution is to get into as many piles as you can. This will increase your chances of getting an interview. And the reason is because, as I said before, supervisors can sometimes arbitrarily pick which pile they interview from. They can tell HR, hey, I only want to interview from the promotion pile, or I only want to interview from the retirement eligibles who are wanting to come back, or I want to interview just from the VRA eligible resumes and interview only veterans. When that's the case, it's almost like you're playing roulette. You don't know which piles the supervisor is going to choose to interview from. And so the solution is to get into as many piles as you can. But of course, you're going to wonder how that is. And the answer is by stating in your cover letter or on your resume that you want to be in every pile that you are eligible for. Specifically, you want your resume to state, I want to be considered as a VEOA, VRA, and Schedule A eligible. If they're true, that is, you have to be eligible for those things. This sentence is just a sample. But the point is, you need to make that statement in your resume so that the HR specialist who's qualifying and reviewing these resumes, once they determine if you're qualified, they can make 3 separate copies of your resume and put your resume into 3 separate piles: VEOA, VRA, or Schedule A. That's the advantage to knowing all of these piles and which ones you're eligible for. If you are an applicant who already works for the federal government, for example, and you're applying for a job that may be at a higher grade and you're trying to get a promotion, you, even as an internal government employee, can still say, I want to be considered as a promotion eligible to get a promotion, but I also want my resume to be in the VRA pile because I am a VRA eligible as well. So you can actually ask that your resume get into 2 separate piles even if you're in the federal government, because sometimes the supervisors will just interview the VRAs only, or the VEOAs only, or the retirees only. But even as a federal employee, you still can get into more than one pile. You just have to know what the piles are and which ones you're eligible for. And I just covered those, so hopefully you can start asking those questions to determine when exactly you are eligible to have your resume put into more than one pile. So now that you have that one little tip on how to increase your chances of getting a federal job, getting an interview, let's move forward with how to create your resume. Let's get started on creating your first federal resume. Let's get started on your resume. A lot of people ask what details need to be on a resume, so I'm going to hit some bullet points right now and talk about some items that need to be typically at the top of your resume. The first is, of course, your name, your home address, your phone number, and your email address. You would probably be shocked at the number of people who submitted resumes and forgot one of these or more than these, or in some cases, all of these. We've literally received resumes that have come from applicants and it didn't contain any contact information whatsoever. They forgot to put their name and address, phone number, and email on their resume and anywhere inside their application package. So please make sure that your name, address, number, and email address are included on all of your resumes. Some of the old school managers, although resumes are now processed electronically and they're sent forward to the supervisor in an electronic fashion, some of the old school managers still like to print out all of the resumes and review them while reading paper. In that case, you're actually trusting this person to print them out in order, staple them in order, and keep them in order in a stack of resumes, but that also includes a whole bunch of other resumes of the people you're competing against. If that's the case, you want to ensure that your contact information is on every page of your resume. If a stack of papers gets dropped on the floor and everything gets mixed up, and this manager prefers to use these paper resumes, he may have a hard time piecing together your resume, page 1 with your page 2 with your page 3. The chances are slim. It's a long shot, but it is something that you should watch out for. You also want to include your federal employment status. If you are currently a federal employee, you want to list your GS title, grade level, and your position title. You want to describe your veteran's preference status, if you're a 5-point preference eligible veteran or 10-point preference eligible veteran. Whether you're VRA eligible, whether you're VEOA eligible, whether you're Schedule A eligible, whether you have a clearance that's active, and your citizenship. These are the items that should be at the top of your resume, and ideally they would be at the top of every single page of your resume if you're writing your own Word resume. The USA Jobs Resume Builder doesn't allow that just because of its format. But if you're writing your own resume in Word, you can have all of these at the top of each page of your resume, and it's a good idea to keep them that way. If you've never built a resume before and you are just getting started from scratch, my advice is to use the Resume Builder inside USA Jobs to draft your first resume. The reason is because it will guide you through the resume writing process, ensuring that you do not leave out important pieces of your application. You don't want to submit a resume that's missing your name and contact information like some people do with Word, where the USA Jobs Resume Builder actually forces you to fill in these boxes before you can move on, and it turns the box red if you've missed it. It calls your attention to it, so it doesn't let you leave anything out. That's why it's valuable when you're just getting started. Now keep in mind, USA Jobs does let you store up to 5 resumes, so you can tailor each one to different positions, but that does include a mix of Word resumes that you've written and USA Jobs resumes that you've created through the system. So you can customize them and have different resumes stored in there for your convenience. The reason you want to use a USA Jobs Resume Builder is because it helps you create a strong resume in that it requires all the information from you. It takes less of your time to customize because it's laid out in its own format. It contains the required information that's necessary for HR specialists to make determinations on whether you're eligible or qualified. And you should use it before you attempt to upload other resumes, because it does, again, it pulls all the information out of you and helps you populate all the fields that need filled, that need completed. If you're going to create a resume and you use USA Jobs Resume Builder first, and then you move all that information into a Microsoft Word resume, for whatever reason, you can copy and paste it from your USA Jobs resume into your Word resume, and it'll have everything in there that you need because the Resume Builder required you to enter all that information. So it makes copying the information, all of the necessary information, easy when you're moving it to a Word document. The Resume Builder also eliminates decorative formatting by generating a template that looks the same for every applicant. So it is ensuring a fair and equal process for everybody who uses them. However, not everyone submits a Resume Builder resume. Many people, if not most people, submit a Microsoft Word resume. But the good news about Resume Builder is the format is standard, and it's anybody who uses it their resume is gonna look just like all of the other applicants who use the Resume Builder as well. Now again, there's nothing worse than reading someone's 20-page federal resume that's really nothing more than a personal biography. That's when people give a history of their 30-year work history, and the HR specialist has to actually crawl through the entire 20-page document to determine if this person is qualified for a job. And that often, it's draining. It's mentally draining on the HR specialist. So you don't want to give them too much information, especially if it's irrelevant information. So the good news is with Resume Builder in USA Jobs, it stops you from creating that long 20-page federal resume that really is nothing more than a personal biography. So it's really handy. It's a really handy program to use, and I always advise people to use that when they're first getting started. The good news is it forces you to keep things simple. It allows you to only include relevant experience. It helps you be to the point. That's what we're getting at here. And make sure to use lots and lots of keywords directly from the announcement, even when you're building your USA Jobs resumes. Here's a screenshot of Resume Builder as it looks now. As you can see, these boxes need to be filled out. These are really, really important. If you're given a work experience history, this allows you to enter the employer's name, what your job title was, and these are things that people often miss or forget or exclude from their resume. And it even invites you to submit your employer address. And the good news is it also requires you to enter in your start date, start year, end date, and end year. And that tells the HR specialist how long you were in those positions. Many people who submit resumes forget to include how long they worked for that particular employer, or they just give years from 2005 to 2006. Well, when you only give those years, it's really hard to determine whether that was 1 month from December of 2005 to January of 2016, or whether it was a full 12 months while you worked there. This defeats that. This USA Jobs Resume Builder requires you to enter your end date, end year, and your start date, start year. So it's very, very helpful for the HR specialist on the other side because it's requiring you to give all of this information. Now down below, it's even asking for salary. What was your salary? Now, this is a little bit controversial, what I'm about to say, but oftentimes if you are applying, for example, to, let's say, an IT specialist position, and I, as the HR specialist, am reviewing your resume, I don't know what you did. I don't understand the lingo. I'm not fully versed in IT duties and responsibilities. I just know the basics in order to qualify a person for an IT specialist job in the government. So if you give me a resume that has a lot of that indicates that you held a lot of IT specialist positions, I don't know what level of responsibility you had if you don't spell it out clearly, but I can sometimes look at the salary and make a determination that you were a higher level type IT specialist if you made $150,000 a year versus if you made $20,000 a year. It helps me determine exactly what level you were, or rather not exactly, but approximate level you worked, the level of responsibility that you had in that position based on your salary. So that's why you should include your salary, because it tells me, the HR specialist, if you were a beginner and you made a low salary, that I can make that determination, a determination point, versus if you had 10 years of experience and now make $120,000 in this field. That tells me that you've got very specialized experience that's very in-depth, and that helps me determine what level of experience you do have. So you do want to include your salary on your resume, even if it's not mandatory. It does help. It's a loose measurement for sure, because different companies pay different rates, different wages. And the same with geographic areas. Sometimes salaries are higher in the Washington, D.C. area than they are in a rural area in Iowa. However, it does help, and it's one small contributing factor, so make sure you do include your salary. But again, going back to the fact that Resume Builder asks you to fill that out, that's a trigger for you to know that that is an important number and you do need to include it. All right, now I'm going to move on to a discussion for the work experience section. This section is where you're going to highlight all of your job experience and specialized experience, and this is where you're going to be able to insert your keywords and really lay out in detail your experience. That'll be in the next section. I'll see you then. Okay, let's look next at the work experience section. This is the most important section of your resume. It's the most important section of your USA Jobs Resume Builder resume. And this is where we're going to dive into the details on how you can word your resume to help improve your chances of being qualified for a job. The work experience section is the most important section of the federal resume. You need to remember to focus on relevant work experience. As I said before, you don't want to give a 20-year biography and mention a bunch of jobs that don't have anything to do with what you're applying for. Now, you can mention those jobs, but the only things you need to list in describing those jobs is what relevant duties that you held will apply to the position that you're applying for. And I'm gonna explore that a little bit deeper here in a couple of slides. You got to make sure you're including the keywords. There's going to be a whole separate section of this course on keywords and where you can find them and how to compile them into the keyword tool that I've designed, and that'll create the basis or the heart of your resume. Your resume should support the KSA statements from the announcement with examples. Now, your resume can be separate from your KSA statements, or it can include your KSA statements inside your resume. And that's kind of what's being pushed these days, is to mix your KSAs into your resume. But historically, people have submitted two separate documents. One, their resume, and two, their KSA paragraph responses or narrative responses document separate from their resume. But you want to make sure that your KSA statements and your resume content go hand in hand and they complement one another. You want to make sure too that you quantify when you can, use as many numbers as you can in each one of the statements in your resume. Numbers help put your scenarios into context. If you say you were a supervisor, that doesn't tell us much, but if you say you were a supervisor of 27 people, well, that paints a different picture then. When you're using numbers, it really, really helps the specialist grasp what it is you did, and of course can only work in your favor. Keep in mind, the job announcements that are built through USA Jobs are built with templates. There are templates that the HR specialists are using when they're putting these together, and the templates now come automatically with this statement. In describing your experience, please be clear and specific. We may not make assumptions regarding your experience. That's very, very important because the HR specialist is not allowed to make assumptions about what you did, even based on your job title. So if you submit a resume that has only job titles on it, we're not going to find you qualified because that doesn't tell us what you did. A key point here is when one applicant gave me their DD-214, and it said that they had been an IT specialist, for example. I forget the job title. But nowhere on this gentleman's resume did it say he was an IT specialist. And so when I found him not qualified, he contested it, and he argued against me in saying that I should have found him qualified based on the DD-214 he gave me, because it stated for 4 years that he was an IT specialist in the military. Unfortunately, I couldn't qualify him based on his job title because, and especially in the military, just because you have a job title doesn't mean that you were performing the duties of that job title. Oftentimes in the military, you get reassigned to perform other duties that have nothing to do with the training you receive or your job title. So I couldn't make those assumptions on what he did for 4 years. And that gentleman got quite angry with me because he didn't give me the details I needed to qualify him, and thought that I would assume based on his job title that he was qualified for the job, and he was not. So the lesson to learn for you is do not make assumptions. Don't expect the HR specialist to make assumptions. You want to hand all of the details that you in your resume, you want to hand them to the specialist on a silver platter. You don't want to make the specialist have to think or guess or assume what you did. Spell it out to them very, very clearly. They can't make assumptions. Here's an example of a statement that came in on a resume from an applicant. It said, developed a tracking spreadsheet. That's not a very good statement. That didn't tell me as an HR specialist a whole lot. A better way this person could have said it was, developed a claims tracking spreadsheet, reducing the amount of time claims were paid. That's a little bit better. That's a good sentence. That tells me a little bit more about what this person did. But even still, you can make it better. One example would be developed an Excel spreadsheet to track claims, reducing the amount of time claims were paid from 30 days to 10 days. That's a good sentence. It incorporates numbers. It talks about Excel spreadsheets. It talks about tracking, reducing timelines, eliminating waste is what I'm gathering from that. So eliminating wasted time specifically. And this person developed it. So this one sentence tells me a whole bunch of things that are very, very useful for me as an HR specialist, compared to that top sentence, which merely says developed a tracking spreadsheet. When you go in depth or you go further into detail, it helps us better determine whether you're qualified for a job or not. And again, you want to use numbers whenever you can. So let me give you a quick quiz. These came in on a resume from an applicant. These bullet points. Maintains and cleans equipment as necessary, communicates with doctors and nurses, works without supervision. Those are the only bullet points, the only details that this person gave us under their job title. What job title do you think that those 3 bullet points belong to? A lot of people guess housekeeping aide or janitor because it says cleans equipment, and that's not correct. Here it is. A food service worker. Somebody who worked in the kitchen submitted this on their resume to us. And as you can see, if you can't tell from the duties they're performing what their job title is, there's probably going to be an issue with qualifying somebody for a job merely because you're not getting a whole lot of giving a whole lot of detail. This isn't telling me much about what they do and what knowledge, skills, and abilities they have, which are gonna make them successful at the job that they're applying to. So this is an example of what not to do. So let's take a look at something that a food service worker submitted. These bullet points came in on a food service worker resume. And as you can see, it discusses preparing a variety of foods, meats, vegetables, desserts, cleaning work areas and equipment, cutting various foods, recording temperature, informing supervisor when the equipment is not working properly. Okay, so what this person did was they actually laid out all of the job duties that they perform on a daily basis. Now that's fine if this food service worker is applying for a food service worker position, because these are the exact bullet points you want when you want to hire somebody into a food service worker position. Meaning, if this person was applying for a promotion in their current job field, this would be a good resume. Okay, a food service worker, WG3, pursuing a WG4 type position where they would get a promotion but still be performing similar duties, this would be golden. However, what if that food service worker wanted to apply to a job as an administrative assistant? Would it make sense for them to include those same bullet points? So for example, one of the bullet points that were on that food service worker's resume were, again, preparing a variety of foods, meats, vegetables, desserts, according to customer orders. Now, that's really good as a food service worker who's applying for a food service worker position, but in this case, they're going to apply to an administrative assistant position. So the question becomes, how can they reword this statement and gear it towards administrative assistant type duties? How can they tweak this sentence so they don't have to talk about meats and vegetables and desserts? Because if I were the supervisor hiring for an administrative assistant, I don't care about meats and vegetables and desserts. That may be what you do daily or what you put your hands on daily, but it doesn't do anything for me who needs an administrative assistant. So what you can do is tweak the sentence in your resume and gear it more towards the job you're applying for so that this bullet point actually becomes rewritten like this. Multitask to successfully complete over 120 customer orders on a daily basis while adhering to approved procedures. See, that's a much, much better way to communicate what you do, but use language that is gearing your statement towards an administrative assistant position. The two bullet points are the same. It's just reworded and framed towards the administrative assistant. I, as the HR specialist, am more likely to qualify somebody based on that bottom bullet point rather than the top bullet point. And that's the whole premise of the work experience section on your resume, is you need to gear it to the position you're applying for and not what you do on a daily basis, hands-on. So let's try that again. Food service worker applying to an administrative assistant position. Here's the bottom bullet point that was under the food service worker's job descriptions. Take and record temperatures of food and food storage in areas such as refrigerators and freezers. Well, I don't care about that. If a food service worker tells me that, it doesn't matter to me. That's not important to me because I'm in the administrative assistant mindset, and that's what I'm looking for, the skills that translate. But the good news is those skills do translate. They just need to be rewritten differently. So that bullet point sentence becomes this. Track and record temperature information in a daily Excel spreadsheet for a monthly food safety report. That's high quality. That's a good sentence because it's geared towards the administrative assistant position. Tracking and recording information. That's useful in the administrative world. Excel spreadsheets is useful. Preparing reports is useful. So now the food service worker has rewritten this sentence and it's truly geared towards the administrative assistant position. That's how you get qualified for positions. So I hope that really helps you understand the work experience section on your resume and how you need to frame your content to the position that you're applying for. Next, we're going to dive deeper down into the keywords and identify the places where you can find keywords and how you extract them and then use them as the basis to write your resume.